During the course of time, the world has seen many great leaders. There have been leaders who are known for changing countries for better or the worse. Some have enacted popular laws. Napoleon and Hitler were both considered leaders. Overall, they achieved many victories and were considered greats. However, they did not start as the powerful men that they became. They started at the bottom of the ladder, and they had to climb long and far to make it to the top. Russia was on the minds of both, and invading would be their downfall. In fact, their previous victories gave them confidence that they should not have had. Their overconfidence eventually led to their crushing defeat.
Napoleon was one of the greatest French leaders of all time. He was born on the island of Corsica. He graduated from a French military academy and eventually became a member of the French army. He was considered a great military strategist, but even this could not save him from what was to come. He rose to power during the French Revolution, which began in 1789. Napoleon quickly climbed the ranks. In fact, he crowned himself emperor in 1804. Napoleon married twice throughout his life. He married first to Josephine Beauharnais, who did not produce a son for him, so he removed her from his life and married Mary Louise. She gave Napoleon II, the son he always wanted. During the following years, he invaded many parts of Europe. He won countless battles throughout this period and was considered a military genius. His men were inspired by the way he led them into battle and showed them just how great of an army and how powerful they truly were together. Before he invaded Russia, Napoleon had a treaty with the people. He told the people that he did not want to fight with them. However, he wanted to force the UK to sue for peace, and Russia's trade with them was stopping that. Napoleon decided to invade Russia with his army of over 400,000 men. So, on June 24, 1812, he and his 400,000 men marched toward Moscow. During this time, he fought many battles and won nearly all of them. However, the Russians used tactics called scorched earth policies. This meant that they burned their villages and stopped Napoleon and his men from taking the spoils of war. So, the environment of Russia began to take a toll on Napoleon's men, and many of them died of starvation and the cold. Napoleon, however, was very reluctant on retreating, as he believed that he and his men could still win the war. During this time, Napoleon himself was also in poor health. In addition, his army was low in numbers and weak, so he was forced to take his army and retreat. However, the Russians continued to harass Napoleon's troops even while they were retreating. At the end of the madness, Napoleon was left with only about 20,000 troops. Napoleon was foolish to continue on. Many of his men were begging to turn around long before they finally decided to retreat. Even though Napoleon was winning battles, he was losing so many men due to how far into Russia he and his men pushed. His foolishness and overconfidence in defeating the Russian army ended up being one of the biggest reasons they fell. Adolf Hitler was born April 20th, 1889 in Austria. He spent most of his childhood in the town of Linz, the capital of northern Austria. He did not finish school. In fact, he quit rather early in life. For a while, he wanted to be an artist. However, he failed to get into the Academy of Fine Arts twice. When screened for the military, he was considered not fit to serve. However, he petitioned King Louis III and requested to serve. He fought during World War I in an infantry unit, but ended up being injured in 1916. In 1919, he started getting involved in politics in Munich. He was responsible for the propaganda of the small German Workers' Party. Later that year, it was renamed the Nazi Party. In 1921, he finally became the leader of this party and started using mass propaganda in the newspaper. The party started to grow rapidly, and he gained many future Nazi leaders. The peak of the rapid growth of the party came when they tried to seize power in Munich Putsch in November 1923. The police and army attacked marchers, and many of them, including Hitler, were injured. Hitler went to court and was sentenced to 5 years in prison for treason. However, he only served a mere 9 months. Hitler's popularity bloomed when he wrote Mein Kampf during his time in prison. The book itself was apparently terrible. In fact, most of those who purchased the book had not read it. However, many members of the German army owned a copy of his book just to say that they did. After getting out of prison, he ran for the presidential election. He was made the chancellor in 1933. Before, he was actually an ally of Stalin, leader of Russia. They both grew very powerful, and eventually Hitler decided to invade Russia. On June 22, 1941, the Germans began Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Unlike Napoleon, Hitler fought and slaughtered everyone. He used a tactic called blitzkrieg, which is a tactic intended for an intense and swift victory in warfare. He stated he would not fall like Napoleon did in the past, but it turns out that Hitler had not learned from Napoleon's mistakes. He started off during the summer and believed that the war would not last long enough for the harsh cold weather to affect him. He thought it would be over roughly around October, at which point the Germans would hope to have conquered many parts of Russia and the Ukraine. One of Hitler's greatest advantages during the war was the machinery that the Germans had under their grasp. One great war machine they had was the tank. They generally did not travel alone and were known as panzer units. These powerful machines were able to blast away enemies quickly and violently without fail. Also, the Germans had planes in the air. These planes were able to see enemies that were hidden or far away. The planes could do more than scout. They could also do small bombing runs to take out unsuspecting Russians. These were very effective during the time, since the Russians were not prepared with anti-aircraft defenses in their cities. Another advanced weapon was the flamethrower. Unlike the modern flamethrower, these were very heavy. In fact, during combat, it normally took 2 people to operate it just due to the weight and bulkiness of it. However, the range of it was relatively far, and normally could take down enemy Russians quickly and consistently. One other devastating weapon they had was artillery. Since the Russians were normally stationary, artillery was very effective to bomb and take out their safe zones. In addition, the weather was rough at times. Hitler had not planned for the war to take long enough to take a toll on his vehicles. He planned on it ending quickly, but that did not happen. Since the war lasted so long, the Russians began to be affected by the changing climate. Many of the planes and other vehicles could not start since the cold was stopping the engines from starting up. Also, the conditions caused many vehicles to get stuck, and Hitler's men were forced to abandon them often. During this war, the Russians also practiced scorched earth policies to stop Hitler's men from taking resources from their cities. The morale of the men was at an all-time low based on their writing from this time. Also, the army was very disorganized and panicked when they were forced to retreat finally.
Hitler's invasion is considered the biggest failure since he failed to learn from Napoleon's mistakes. When he invaded Russia, he went in claiming that he and his army would win quickly. However, the war lasted much longer than he predicted, and many of his men died. He thought his advanced technology would be enough to win, but Stalin held his ground and fought back. Russia burned all their villages, and the cold weather rolled in. With all their technology, they thought they would win the war, but the cold ended up making it useless. This great failure ended up being the downfall of Hitler's army and later led to his death. It is very ironic that he could identify the mistakes Napoleon made and go into Russia and let the cold defeat him too. Some would say that Napoleon's failure was much greater. It is true that he was very stubborn. His men were constantly begging to turn around. They were just getting deeper and deeper into Russia, and they were unprepared for this kind of campaign. However, Napoleon's mind could not be changed, and they chased the Russians further and further until many of his men died. His poor planning for defeating the Russians did not help either. If he planned for a longer conquest and for the devastating weather, maybe he would have not have lost his people. In the end, he was left with a small fraction of the people he started with, and many lost trust in him. Also, his own health was declining. However, even though these were all big mistakes, he was the first to fight Russia, so it is more understandable for him to make mistakes. He did not expect his war to last so long, but Hitler knew better. Hitler learned about Napoleon and his failures. Even though Hitler knew about how Napoleon's invasion went wrong, he continued in Russia and made the same mistakes. This makes his failures even greater than Napoleon's. Overall, both of these men failed greatly. Before these events, they were considered some of the most powerful men in the world. Their leadership was legendary, and many feared their power. If they had planned more carefully and thought about what could go wrong, maybe they would have won. Maybe history would have been different. Maybe Germany and France would have had more land than they do today. However, the past is already said and done. Even though this was not the end of either, these defeats were devastating to both Napoleon and Hitler. Napoleon ended up losing way more men than he should have because he refused to retreat when they were fighting. He will always be known as a foolish leader who led his men to their deaths. However, Hitler refused to learn from past mistakes. This was one of the Nazis' first defeats and one of their greatest. They lost many men, their morals were devastated, and the overall opinion of Hitler as a commander and ruler was reduced considerably.